Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly monumental framework for understanding human nature. We're diving deep into Robert Sapolsky's incredible book, Behave, the biology of humans at our best and worst. Now, if you don't know Sapolsky, he's this brilliant neuroendocrinologist and primatologist. He's literally spent decades in the lab looking at the neurobiology of stress and out in the field studying wild baboons in Kenya. We're going to break down his massive synthesis of why we humans do the things we do, both the amazing things and, well, the pretty awful things.
Okay, let's dive into this and pose our anchor question for today. Why do we behave the way we do? Simple question, right? But the thing is, to understand just a single human action, whether that's a moment of breathtaking compassion or a totally senseless act of violence, we have to look way, way beyond just one scientific discipline. If you're only looking at psychology, or only genetics, or just culture, you are totally missing the forest for the trees.
So, to get the complete picture, we'll use a sort of zoom lens, structurally traveling backwards in time. We'll hit 1, why do we behave? Then 2, seconds before, 3, days before, 4, years before, 5, millennia before, and finally, 6, doing the hard right thing.
Starting with part 1. Why do we behave? The temporal framework of our actions.
And this brilliantly illustrates Sapolsky's central premise. Relying on just one bucket of science, like saying it's all genetics or it's all neuroscience, is just way too reductionist. Human behavior is super complicated. It's this messy, beautiful synthesis. This timeline maps out the framework, widening our field of vision step by step. 1 second before an action, we're looking at neurology. Hours to days before, endocrinology and hormones. Years before, we're in the realm of development. And millennia before, genetics and evolution. Every single time you try to explain a behavior, you're actually looking at a continuous, seamless stream of influences.
Moving to part 2, seconds before, the brain. The neurobiology of intent. All right, so starting just milliseconds before an action happens, we're looking directly at the brain as the final common pathway for behavior. It's essentially a tale of two brain regions constantly duking it out. On one side, you've got the amygdala. This is an older, deeply emotional part of the brain, the absolute hub for fear, arousal, anxiety, and those intuitive snap judgments. On the other side is the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. Think of this as the gleaming, rational, newer part of the brain. It's the hub of regulation, restraint, executive function, and essentially doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. The PFC is constantly working overtime trying to inhibit and regulate that impulsive amygdala.
To give you an idea of just how insanely fast this battle happens, check out this number, 0.1 seconds. In brain scanning studies, when volunteers are briefly flash the face of someone from another race, what we call an outgroup face, 75% of them show amygdala activation in under a tenth of a second. That is literally a rapid, intuitive snap judgment. But here's the fascinating part. In the majority of those subjects, just a few seconds later, the prefrontal cortex catches up, turns down the amygdala, and basically whispers, hey, don't think that way. That is not who I am.
Let's zoom out to part 3. Days before. Hormones, the endocrinology of intent. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it busts some massive popular myths. When we widen the lens to hours and days before a behavior, we see how our endocrine system is essentially priming our brain. Take testosterone. People think it causes aggression, right? Actually, no. It just lowers the threshold for it, and it totally distorts your judgment, making completely neutral faces suddenly seem threatening. Crazy, right? Then there's oxytocin. Everyone calls it the love hormone. Well, scratch that. It's not that simple. Yes, it increases trust and generosity for people we consider us, our in-group, but it has the exact opposite effect for them, the out-group, making us way less cooperative. And finally, glucocorticoids, like cortisol. These chronic stress hormones actually sensitize your amygdala and disrupt the frontal cortex, so we fall back on rapid, habitual, and honestly, often pretty poor choices.
Widening out even more, part 4, years before, development, the neuroplasticity of our past.
Expanding our field of vision backward to months and years before an action even occurs, we see how our environments literally sculpt our brains. Looking at the table, let's start with adolescence. Normal development means the reward centers are highly active, but that prefrontal cortex, it isn't fully developed until our mid-20s. That biologically explains why teenagers are so prone to risk-taking. Going back further to childhood, severe stress or abuse can literally lead to a biologically smaller, thinner prefrontal cortex and a permanently enlarged, hyperreactive amygdala. And if we go all the way back to the fetal stage, a mother's severe stress or poverty floods the fetus with those glucocorticoids we talked about. This causes epigenetic changes that can program that brain for heightened anxiety and depression for the rest of that person's entire life.
Now to the absolute limit. Part 5. Millennia Before. Evolution. The Cultural and Genetic Legacy.
We are now zooming out to look at how the ecological pressures of our ancestors thousands of years ago shaped the cultures we're born into today. For example, populations that evolved in clement weather with mild temperature fluctuations, they tended to create more individualistic cultures. But harsher environments, those forged collectivist ones. Our biology is totally intertwined with our ancestors' ecology. Which brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from Sapolsky. When you explain a behavior with one of these disciplines, you are implicitly invoking all the disciplines. This is his strict no buckets rule. If you talk about a hormone, you are invoking the gene that coded it, the fetal environment that altered that gene via epigenetics, and the evolutionary history that shaped that gene over millennia. It is, as the saying goes, turtles all the way down. It's all deeply, deeply interconnected.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Part 6, doing the hard right thing, overcoming our biology.
So, you might be wondering, if we're just the product of all this biological and environmental luck, how do we ever actually change? How do we defeat our worst tribalistic instincts? Well, the truth is, reason and emotion aren't totally separate things. To do the right thing when it's the hard thing, our prefrontal cortex absolutely requires emotional input, but it has to regulate it. When we're dealing with complex moral dilemmas, especially those toxic us versus them scenarios, our rapid amygdala-driven intuitions are usually just terrible. In these moments, we have to consciously keep that rapid intuition as far away as possible and force ourselves to pause, reason, and really think it through.
So the crucial point is, how do we actually actionalize this? Well, Sapolsky offers some highly actionable, step-by-step strategies to bypass our biological biases. Step 1. Actively take the perspective of the them. Step 2. Intentionally hunt for common similarities between your group and the outgroup. Step 3. Individuate. You've got to stop looking at them as a monolith and start seeing them as specific individuals. And Step 4. Come together with outgroup members in shared collaborative work settings where everyone is treated as an equal. Doing this literally changes the way your brain processes social information. It's a real game changer.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder today. Sapolsky argues heavily for determinism, the idea that we are the product of our biology, our environments, and nothing more. So if every single human behavior really is the result of biological and environmental luck all the way down the timeline, how does that change how we judge ourselves? How does it completely upend how we punish others in our justice system? Understanding the sheer, massive complexity of why we behave the way we do doesn't just give us cool scientific facts. It actively challenges us to rethink free will, moral responsibility, and maybe, just maybe, to view each other with a whole lot more grace and empathy.